This is the first prayer proclamation ever issued by George Washington. I want to just read you what he said in 1789 in the first federal proclamation for prayer. George Washington wrote this himself. Whereas it is the duty of all nations to acknowledge the providence of Almighty God. Now, he's not saying do it privately.
Right.
He's saying it's the duty of nations to acknowledge the providence of Almighty God. It's the duty of nations to obey His will, to be grateful for His benefits, and humbly to implore His protection and favor. Now, he's not saying that's the duty of individuals. He said that's the duty of nations. Now, the second president, John Adams, this is a famous prayer proclamation that he wrote. He goes a little further on why we do public religious acknowledgement. Here's what he says. He says, as the safety and prosperity of nations ultimately and essentially depend on the protection and the blessing of Almighty God, and as the national acknowledgement of this truth not only is an indispensable duty which the people owe to Him, but a duty whose natural influence is favorable to the promotion of that morality and piety without which social happiness cannot exist. He said, it's your duty as a nation to acknowledge God because that produces the social happiness without which we can't exist.
Wow.
It's your duty to acknowledge God as a nation. He didn't say it individually. He said that's a national duty. Now, you take the third president, Thomas Jefferson. Jefferson may have been more pointed than the rest. Just read, this is the first book that Thomas Jefferson ever wrote. This is called Notes on the State of Virginia, written by Thomas Jefferson. And in this section, he has a number of chapters. He calls them queries. This is query 18. And in query 18, this is what Thomas Jefferson says. Can the liberties of a nation be thought secure if we remove their only firm basis, which is a conviction in the minds of the people that these liberties are the gift of God, that they are not to be violated but with His wrath? He said, indeed, I tremble for my country when I reflect that God is just and His justice won't sleep forever. Now he says, you can't have national liberties if you don't have a conviction in the minds of the people that these liberties are the gift of God.
The part that you just dealt with right there, the date now, Dave, in which these documents were written, you're citing from original documents.
That's right.
You're not talking about something you read in a book that was published in the 50s or the 60s or the, you know, you're talking about the words of the guys. So the proclamation would have been issued by Washington in what date? I mean, what are we talking
Well,
here?
the date on this proclamation says right here, Saturday, October the 17th, 1789.
1789.
That's the date of the proclamation. And by the way, this proclamation, now we've talked about the First Amendment, how the courts use that to stop religious activity. Yes. You know why this proclamation was given? Because they had just finished writing the First Amendment. They just finished the First Amendment. They said, we need to stop and thank God for what we've just done. Gosh. So our first national Thanksgiving was done the day that they finished writing the First Amendment. The day they approved it, they said, it's time to stop and thank God for what we've done. But this is original from 1789. That is George Washington's first Thanksgiving proclamation, 1789.
Wow.
I'm not normally speechless, but that is very profound to me. To think of the condition of the way we think.
That's right.
As opposed to the way the original intent was.
Let me take it a step further, because we're told do religion in private, not public. When you look at proclamations like this, between 1622 and 1815, you have 1,500 proclamations, official proclamations for prayer issued in America. Of those 1,500, 300 are issued by churches, 1,200 are issued by the government. So the government is issuing prayer proclamations at a rate 4 times higher than the churches are. That goes from 1622 to 1815. If you go from 1815 forward, there literally are still thousands more prayer proclamations issued by the government, because we knew, as these proclamations said, it was a national duty which the people owed. Wow. It wasn't a private duty. This is something that is substantial, that's necessary for our own happiness as a nation. As Jefferson said, and see, what Jefferson has said is so key. The reason you publicly acknowledge God is because that's the source of your liberties. What's that mean? It's an indispensable truth that if you're going to have inalienable rights, and an inalienable right is defined as a right that God gave you, if you ever lose sight of the fact that your rights come from God, then you lose your rights. See, the right to property is a God-given right, which they talk about.
Wow.
Well, now we're convinced that it's a court-given right.
Yeah.
And courts can take it away as they want to, eminent domain, anything else. It's not a God-given right anymore.